Welcome to this episode of 10 Minutes with Sam. This is Akshat Singh. Joining me today is Mr. Neil Makhija. Mr. Neil Makhija is a lawyer based out of Philadelphia, where he is the president of the South Asian Bar Association of Philadelphia. He is the executive director of Impact, which is the leading South Asian civic organization in the US. And he is also a lecturer at the UPenn Carey Law School. We're glad to have you on the show, sir.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate what you do.
So the format of the show is very simple. We have 10 minutes and we'll try covering as much ground as possible in these 10 minutes. So let's dive right in. My first question to you is that organizations such as Impact have been leading a movement to mobilize resources to help with the ongoing COVID crisis in India. What is the sort of response that you've received from the community here?
Well, I think Indian Americans in particular recognize that this pandemic is not going to end anywhere until it ends everywhere. And, we know this because many of us do have family in India and elsewhere abroad where the vaccination rate is still, in the single digits. And it's a serious problem because as we're beginning to recognize now that India's recent surge, which is really just the most devastating of anywhere in the world, it could be up to 4 million people or more that have died due to COVID in India. We recognize that the real cause of that is actually the variants and the development of potentially this new variant B.1.617, which is now being called the Delta variant. And it just takes one mutation of this virus, which happens when you have a population that is not vaccinated. It just takes one mutation to spread throughout the world. And that's all it would take to set back all the progress we've made in the US. It could take an entirely new vaccine if we don't vaccinate the world and actually make sure we have a coordinated global response.
Absolutely. And I mean, we do have to commend the work that you've been doing with Impact to mobilize resources. Let's talk a little bit about your professional experiences. You are a lawyer and you have made a foray in national politics as well. How do you think the political landscape for Indian Americans has evolved, especially since the election of Kamala Harris? And how do you see it changing in the future?
Well, I think 2020 was a critical year for Indian Americans, and we achieved so many firsts in our community. Here in Philadelphia, we have our first state senator in U.S. or in Pennsylvania's history to be elected. Nikhil Saval is his name. We have a state senator in Vermont who's the first ever in history. We have state senators in New York who are the first ever. And, that's at the lower level. Obviously, we know goes all the way up to the top. We're right next to the top with the vice president, with Kamala Harris, who has been very much involved in the South Asian community, whether it's through the Bar Association and when she was a district attorney, or through Impact. She was actually at our founding as an organization. She was at our founding summit in 2018. She recognizes the importance of bringing together communities of color, given that she is the daughter of both a Jamaican and an Indian, of Jamaican and Indian immigrants. I think she is someone who uniquely can tell the story of how our destinies are intertwined and how the causes of civil rights and inclusion and immigration are tied together.
That is absolutely true. Having someone at the top who is so sensitive to the needs of people of color is a very important integral step. You spoke about Impact briefly, and it is a leading organization that you have managed from a leadership role. Could you tell me a little bit about your work with Impact and with the Brown Book?
So our goal is to enfranchise Indian Americans in the South Asian community, bring them into politics in a way that they really haven't been. Asian Americans broadly are the most underrepresented in politics. That's if you look at the stats in terms of which communities hold public office or have folks, we're about 85% less than where we should be. So deeply underrepresented, whereas if you look at Latinos, Blacks, and whites, definitely all people of color are underrepresented, but then, whites are like 50% overrepresented in terms of state offices, federal offices, et cetera. So, our goal is to really systematically go about finding ways to get communities that are being left out and tell people how to run for office, how to engage in the process. And that goes from elected office to also campaign staff to also federal and state government employees. So that was the Brown Book. We collected over, I think, 1,000 resumes by the end, submitted that to the Biden administration, indexed it, sorted it, made it easier to show people with various expertises, and just filled this recruitment function, which is largely absent in many organizations, which, really tries to dig deeper into communities to find people who might not have a natural connection, who might not have a parent or relative or somebody they know who worked in this field, or that's generally the struggle that immigrant communities have, is that, we don't have the same reach of like mentorship and network that somebody who's had generations of family and, other folks that their families have been close to from being in the US for more than one generation.
And the fact that a lot of Indian Americans do not have a foot in the door in the political system, and Impact is working towards changing that, is very impressive. While doing my research, I actually found out that Impact is also directly supporting brown candidates who are seeking office through helping them with their campaign measures, etc. And again, that is an integral measure for someone who does not have a foot in the door in the political landscape. So since Impact is an organization that caters to brown candidates seeking political office, how optimistic are you about the space, about your work?
I'm incredibly optimistic because I think people are starting to realize that every community matters, especially in a time where you look at these elections where the fate of the US, the entire direction of this country is determined by 10,000 people in one state or 40,000 people in another state. And that just goes to show that every vote matters, every community matters. And in a place like Georgia, where the US Senate was decided based on a very close election, Indian Americans made the difference. We we have over 100,000 Indian Americans in the state of Georgia, 500,000 in the state of Texas. These are all critical electoral battlegrounds that are really going to determine the future of the country. Do we follow a perspective where we think that we can build walls and basically ignore the rest of the world and feel like we can kind of just take care of ourselves and that's it? Or are we going to recognize, as we must have through this pandemic, that issues like climate and COVID-19, if you're not addressing them on a global scale, you're not going to be addressing them at home. So I think there are certain perspectives our community has that kind of recognizes that certain local problems require global solutions. But I also think that we as a community care about civil rights, we care about inclusion, and we care about basic things that all Americans care about, like healthcare and education. So it's really important to have our voice at the table, and it's never been more clear at how influential and how pivotal that can be in these times of polarization.
Absolutely, Neil. I think you hinted a little over there at possible electoral reform as well, but let's not jump into that for now. My final question to you for today is that you have been a lawyer for quite some time now, and you also made headways in national politics. Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
It's a good interview question. I think the right answer is I'd be celebrating the 10th anniversary of you asking me this question. But I have learned slowly that you really can't plan these things. I did not plan 10 years ago. So 10 years ago was 2011. I was a staffer, actually. I got my first job in the US Senate. after being an intern in the White House. So I've clearly stayed in this realm of politics and organizing, and it's because I've cared deeply about having people's voice heard and having the government reflect a community's values. And I certainly will continue in that work. I'm hoping that Impact in 10 years will be celebrating an anniversary where we are very much enfranchising our community on a national scale in every state. Obviously, the census is coming out, and this is the first time that we even really have the data on our community. But I think we're going to see that we're the fastest growing group in the country, and that's really going to show in terms of our representation. In the last 4 years, we went from 12 in elected office to 36, and it's really a rising force in politics. And I hope I continue to play some role. Maybe this role may be a different one, but I imagine I will stay here in the organizing space, supporting candidates, and continuing to teach election law and helping the next generation make a difference through public service.
Well, thank you, Neil. Notwithstanding the cliche nature of the question, I hope that your objectives and aspirations for impact are met in 10 years. This brings us to the end of 10 minutes. It was lovely having you on the show. It was lovely speaking with you. We'd speak to you sometime soon again.
Thank you so much. Great to meet you.
Great to speak to you.